Welcome to the HoCo Cyber Collective Podcast, where community, technology, and stories converge.
Hey everyone, thanks again for joining us for the HoCo Cyber Collective Podcast. This is Colin Hamill, and today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Tom McNamara, founder and CEO of Hopr. Tom and I met as part of the first cohort of the Cyber Howard Accelerator, and just a shout out to them. They just had their kickoff for the second cohort that we both are going to be participating in. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's great to be here today, Colin. Thank you for showing your leadership for the area in taking this initiative to bring the podcast to a larger community. So I think it's great. I'm glad to be here.
Appreciate it. Glad to have you on. So Tom, tell us a little bit about yourself, your entrepreneurial journey. How did you come? Basically, tell me the story of how you came to find yourself on this podcast today.
Yeah, that's a long journey.
You got time.
So I'm a engineer by formal training, but it's a type of engineering that's not really associated with cybersecurity at all. I was actually got my bachelor's degree in ocean engineering in Florida Atlantic University, and spent most of my career working up in the Washington, D.C. area with Department of Defense projects and programs for the government, and then in private industry as well. So I've been in national security, I've been in defense and some intelligence programs and those types of things for 3 or 4 decades. And over that time, of course, the internet came about. And that's when I got my first exposure to technology and software. And as I moved up through my career path, I became the founding president and CEO for Virginia Tech's Applied Research Corporation.
Oh, wow.
And did that for about 6 years. We had a cybersecurity division led by Paige Atkins, who was excellent at it. But in my last year there, before I retired from that position, I was the victim of about 5 data breaches. And these were not breaches at VTR. These were breaches by third-party companies that we had services with, like an insurance company, for example, or OPM had a large data breach as well. So, my fingerprints ended up in China. But they happened in such a flurry. And the last one, really the straw that broke the camel's back was the last one, really affected my children. Their data was stolen too. And, I'm an older guy, so I don't have too much of life left to worry about what could happen to my data, but my kids had, their whole lives ahead of them. And so that animated me to kind of go on a crusade as to why can't well-funded companies with access to top talent do a better job of securing our data, my data.
Here.
And I discovered a couple of things after digging into that a bit. One is security doesn't always get the budget that companies need to invest to live up to the expectations and the promises and the laws that says data privacy is important. They'll say the mantra, but it's not always funded at that level of a priority. The second is that everything that we built over time was never built with security in mind. The internet was invented to share information between computers. And so openness and sharing was the foundation, not security. And because of that, everything has been a patch ever since then. And so we've patched in security, but all of those have been static defenses. And those static defenses are just like in a true military combat situation. They can be observed, they can be reconnaissance, they can be plotted against and figured out vulnerabilities. And then, before the attack begins, there's a high likelihood of success because those defenses are going to be the same then as they were 6 months ago when you did your reconnaissance type of thing. So what we ended up discovering is, wouldn't it be nice if we could take all of the information that is changing dynamically in the internet, what we call today the cloud, but it's across the internet, right? We have news stories, we have financial data, we have weather sensors, all the IoT stuff, feeding data between machines, and it's all very, very dynamic. Wouldn't it be nice if we could use that dynamic information in a way that would help protect the internet itself? And so that's where I left Virginia Tech Applied Research Corporation, still working on this problem. And I had this idea one morning. I just woke up with this idea in my head, kind of an epiphany, like, hey, I think there's a way we could do that. We could take dynamic data out of the internet from various places, and we could hop a person's password every day. And all they would ever have to remember is a simple formula. So if I fed them a bunch of headlines, say in an email in the morning, or they went to CNN, news or whatever news outlet they had, they could look at the first 3 headlines of the day and know their password just by reading the content on the web. And so we had a thing we called a formula. And then in the back end, our systems would automatically change and rotate their passwords for them as if they were logging on to change their password themselves. But we would do it at like 12:30 or 1 o'clock at night. And every morning they would have a new set of passwords for the various sites that they had signed up to use this on. And they would not have to remember the password. They could just look at the news that day. So that was a technique called password hopping. And that was the genesis for starting Hopr. We had originally built a prototype and demonstrated it could work. And just as we were maturing that into an MVP, it turned out the methods we were using, the actual mechanisms we were using to change passwords at 1:30 in the morning on behalf of the user into their accounts, those became a security risk. And so the architectures for many web apps and that sort of thing changed to close that loophole, because there's no one to tell us from a hacker who was trying to go in and change a password as well. So we had to adapt and come up with another approach and methodology. And we discovered that as well, that the approach that we took of feeding someone an email with a number of headlines in it, or requiring them to look at a news site every morning, was not user-friendly. And this was back in, say, 2017 timeframe. Mm-hmm. And so everybody was talking about, let's kill the password. We don't want to use passwords. We want passwordless. And so we were coming up with a better password. The market was asking for passwordless, and we decided, hey, this isn't a fight we're going to win, and the market is moving to passwordless. Where else can we use this? And so we began to talk to a number of analysts, market analysts and experts, and they said, there's nothing else. We've never seen anything like this. We've looked we know everything that's going on in the world. We've never seen anything like this before, but it's not really built for humans. But you ought to think about using this for machines in the cloud. There are a lot of machines in the cloud, and they have the same type of authentication and authorization problem that passwords have. They're static. They have API keys that are issued right once, and then they don't change for a long, long time. So we pivoted our technology to focus on machines in the cloud. There's a lot more machines in the cloud. I think today the ratio is something like 46 to 50 machines per human. And then that number is growing every day because of more IoT devices coming into the cloud. And, you just think of wearables, your iPhone or your iWatch and anything else that is connected to the internet, your thermostats in your house, et cetera, they all have to have an IP address. And any other entity that wants to get into them have to be authenticated. But those are all static passwords, static identities that are used, which means that they're vulnerable to theft and abuse. So we pivoted our technology, password hopping technology, to machines in the cloud, and that's where we've been for the past few years. We make a product that's a software product. It's a type of proxy. So proxies are things that perform functions on behalf of something else, but they perform it multiple times over, so that, say, let's take a software application, for example. If I were a developer writing a web app, writing a bunch of web apps, for every web app, I would have to code up all of the networking connections that allow it to connect to the internet. Well, there's a proxy that's been created to do the networking function. So I don't have to worry about the networking configurations and the networking functionality of connecting to a network. I just can work on my web app and get that working, and then connect it to the proxy, and the proxy handles everything else for me. So it's kind of like a universal tool that proxy access. And so what we've done is we've taken our technologies, same technology we had with password hopping, we put that into a networking proxy to be able to do this authentication and authorization, essentially the same type of hopping, but we just call it credential hopping now rather than password hopping, because we're hopping two credentials. But that's how Hopr came about. So we were formed in 2017. We have been selling primarily into the cloud infrastructure world. So we're a combination of cybersecurity and cloud infrastructure, because that's what we protect. We protect. So just for the audience, that may not understand this, when you use a web app on your computer, that app, browser page essentially that's being presented to you is connected back into the cloud to a machine that is presenting that HTML page.
Right.
But that machine sits in front of an application that is going to acquire some data from you or display some data to you. That application is running in something that in modern software design is called a container.
Okay.
And a container is simply a box, if you will, that holds software and all of its dependencies. So in most applications, when a developer writes one, they're going to reuse a lot of code that somebody else has already developed. And so they when they write their program, they pull in these dependencies, these other software packages and libraries that they need to do certain functions inside their app. And all of that stuff in a container, all of that stuff gets packaged together and then deployed. So you don't have to worry about updating things or anything like that. That's one of the major benefits of containerization, is everything that you need for your app to run is in that container, and it's an image that can be loaded onto, say, a computer in a data center.
Yep.
And so that's what we call a containerized app, and that's where our proxy operates with those containerized apps to manage their credentials.
Do you have any slides or anything you could show us?
Yeah. Let me give you a little, let me share. And
but that's pretty interesting. And the thing that I like about it is that what a human user, I guess the hardest part of cybersecurity is that it annoys humans. Who doesn't wish you could just have a shorter password, or like you said, no password at all?
yeah,
We also still want to be secure, it's like saying I want to be super healthy, fit, and athletic, but I only want to eat junk food and candy.
yeah,
How can we make that happen? And a lot of times those two things are at odds with each other, and you're trying to bridge that gap.
yeah,
I see you now.
great. So, I mentioned that most all of the cyber defenses that we use today, the conventional cybersecurity defenses, are built on a foundation that's static, that seldom changes, and we have credentials that are long-lived, user IDs, passwords, or in the case of machines, machine identity credentials and keys like API keys.
And credentials are almost never updated in some cases, especially with IoT. They're literally not designed to be updated. You set them up.
Yeah.
That's a permanent problem to have.
Yes, and I'll get into this a little bit more, but what we've done, what Hopr's done is we've come up with a way to actually make the defense dynamic. And so we call it three-dimensional defense in motion. The AMTD acronym you see here on the screen stands for Automated Moving Target Defense, and that's a label that Gartner created in 2023, and they described it as the future of cyber. And perhaps after a little while, you'll see why that might be the case. But the idea that you could have a defense that's continually changing was what they saw as being a great benefit, because most of the defenses we have today are relying on detection of threats and responding to those threats, which is oftentimes based on the behavior of the threat, or it's based upon some types of alerts and scanning systems, which all produce probabilistic, likelihoods of something being a threat.
Right.
And so they're slow. They tend not to be very accurate, and threats can actually learn a defense like that and bypass it and avoid it. But the concept of a moving target defense, which has been around historically since World War II, is that it's a very capable, almost passive, but automatic defense, in that you don't need to know anything about the threat, their intentions, or their behaviors. You're just taking something that they need to launch their attack, and you're either hiding it or moving it around really quickly or obfuscating it in some way that they can't find it. And if they do find it, it's not going to stay the same long enough for them to do anything with the information they got.
Like a ship moving at sea at high speed.
Yeah, that's the whole idea of a moving target. Like, trying to shoot at if you're a duck hunter or a bird hunter, you can try to shoot a bird out of the sky, but it's hard, very, very hard to do. And that's the same concept here. Is a cyber threat can't act on something it can't know about deterministically. And so the idea of automated moving target defense, and Hopr was named as a tech innovator in this space because of what we do is we call it a cloud native form of AMTD. So it's designed to work with containerized software in cloud architectures, modern cloud software architecture. So our products run in, say, Kubernetes environments and those types of things. Right. We have, as I said, we have these three dimensions of our defense. We have taken the secret, which is usually used for authentication, traditionally an authentication secret. We've decentralized that so it sits with every workload. Every workload has its own ability to generate its own secret and use that secret there. So in conventional systems, Colin, the central service has to provide that secret out of a vault or a key management system or something like that. So you have to reach back to the central cloud service. Gotcha. and get that. And you need an API to do that, to get it, which also needs a key. And so you have this problem of this chain of keys to get other keys, which creates a problem, which we won't go into.
It requires the internet, from what it sounds like.
Pardon me?
It requires the internet to be up and functional.
Yeah, but even time, they tell you to vault your keys or lock up your keys and secure your keys, but you need a key to get into the vault.
Right.
So we're going to keep that key. And so this is what they call the secret zero problem. At some point in time, it comes back to one key that allows you to get into everything. And so what we've done is we've decentralized the secrets management so that you don't rely on the central services of a cloud vendor or key management systems, crypto systems, and that sort of thing. And we've made those keys ephemeral, which means they change frequently. They're short-lived, and so they get replaced often, and they're replaced automatically. And I'll show a demo of what that's like here shortly.
Okay.
The second, so moving the secrets is one dimension. The second dimension is that we also move an identity credential, which is ephemeral as well. So it's constantly hopping and changing. But the unique thing we do with this identity credential is we have the ability to actually, as it hops and it becomes a new credential every time, we have the ability to verify that that identity credential is in fact who they say they are. And
Okay.
this is really important because our nation's zero trust strategy says that we need to verify every transaction. We need to know every transaction, who is making the transaction, and verify that. Well,
Right.
in a runtime cloud environment, there are millions of transactions going on. And yet all of those identity credentials that are used today are static, and they were issued to those workloads without ever checking or verifying who that requester was. There's a thing called a certificate signing request. And so to get an identity, if you were a machine, to get an identity credential, you submit a certificate signing request, and what you get back is an identity credential. So you can imagine, that you could get your driver's license that way without a photo, without anything, without any vetting of who you were. They would just give you a driver's license. Well, that doesn't work for humans, and it shouldn't work for machines.
And actually, I appreciate. So, could you bring up? Let's take a step back. For people out there, whenever we use this term zero trust, could you just explain a little bit more about what we mean when we say zero trust?
Yes. So zero trust is a term that the federal government, U.S. federal government coined. I think it was back in 2021, but it was in December of 2020, I believe, where the U.S. discovered, and actually I think it was maybe FireEye was the corporation that discovered somebody had gotten in and hacked their systems, and a company called SolarWinds, who delivered software to a whole number of large organizations, including the federal government, a lot of federal government agencies, had also been compromised. And the threat actor had found a way to use to essentially alter the software and sign the software as if it was officially from SolarWinds, but they had planted a bug in the software,
Right.
malicious a bug in the software, so that when it got delivered through normal updates and patches to all of these clients of SolarWinds, they downloaded this bug into their systems and treated it as legitimate software. And it began to operate, and over, I think it was like 6 months, it was operating without detection. And finally, it was discovered and detection. But that's when sort of the roof caved in on the premise and the assumption that our perimeter security systems were good enough to keep out threats. And
they themselves will never be compromised ever. That was
the cybersecurity world,
it was an earthquake.
Sold products to customers that they had a defense that would keep out the bad guys, and the truth was they didn't. And these were not, SolarWinds, FireEye, Microsoft was involved. There were a whole bunch of congressional hearings.
Yep.
The federal government was hurt badly by it. They called back. I remember the news story. Several secretaries of departments were called back from overseas trips. There was a lot of scrambling going on at right around Christmas time.
Always in the holidays.
Yeah.
2021, 2020 was a rough time.
Yes. So President Biden issued an executive order, which I forget, it's OMB 2209, I think is the number, but it's essentially the zero trust strategy. Said, look, we have to assume a breach. That's the basic premise of zero trust is we should have zero trust about who is in our environments, and we need to repeatedly verify at every transaction
Right.
what machines are asking for, what people are asking for accesses and everything.
Right.
That's where the label zero trust came from. It's, in my view, it's kind of an unfortunate label because it describes that we need to have zero trust about who's in our networks, but what we
Right.
really need to have is high trust of our systems. And
I think high
hopefully,
trust is another acronym for something else too.
yeah, but hopefully when we get talking later here, we'll get into AI, we'll talk more about the importance of trust. But this second dimension of our motion is the fact that we're changing identity credentials for these workloads frequently, just like we are for the secrets. We're changing the identity credentials frequently, hopping them, but we're also able to verify that credential, which can't be done with current conventional identity certificates.
Right.
And then the third,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say the third thing that we do in terms of our three-dimensional defense in motion is a technique called runtime microsharding, which is a consequence of having our cloud-native AMTD type of defense. So when we build a cloud-native AMTD defense, we're building it around two workloads, like think of a database and a web app having to share data.
Right.
We're building around those two workloads and the communication channel only for the time that they have to communicate. And so it's as if we've taken, with that AMTD defense, it's as if we've taken the attack surface at the application layer and broken it into millions of little pieces, fractured it into millions of little pieces that appear and disappear in time. And that's the technique so the idea of a shard is a broken piece of glass. We've taken that attack surfaces and just broken it into many, 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 many small pieces, but they're also ephemeral because they're appearing and disappearing. And so this has an effect on threat actors in the sense that when they do their reconnaissance, they can't be certain about what's going to be where, when, and how to get into it. And so the application layer is part of the attack surface, and there's a network layer and the transport layer and other layers as well. But the application layer is the one that's the most exposed and is oftentimes the most exploited and has the most risk of zero-day attacks and those types of things.
Yeah, the example that I thought of was like, again, back in World War II, where they would have different call and counter call password type things that would change often.
Yes.
And someone giving the wrong counter call was you just opened fire. There was
Yes.
you didn't have to investigate anymore. Anyone who gave the wrong
Yes.
sign is by definition malicious. You shouldn't be here because you don't have. And but what you're doing it is it's not just a simple one-to-one thing. It's you've broken all of the pieces down, and they're all doing those little call counter call things, and they're changing it with the efficiency and diligence of a machine. That this would be a horrible thing to ask people to do, but for these cloud workloads, it's perfectly fine.
Yes.
Look.
So the idea here, the icon here with the little two bad guys bouncing off the protection is, we can protect the endpoints and we can protect the data. And the defense is such a defense that they can't bypass it. They can't predict it and they can't bypass it, which they can with some of the conventional defenses that are static,
right,
or observable, mappable, etc.
Well, and this is so you brought up SolarWinds before, and this is something that also is near and dear to my heart. And you had brought this topic up at one of our previous meetings. It's sort of this general question of because the threat actors are not these are not like a storm or something. These are evil versions of us, basically, that are active. These are other human beings that are very intelligent, and they're acting with malign intent. So how does a cybersecurity company like yourself or mine or SolarWinds, how can you protect yourself against being yourself attacked? Because
Yeah.
we've seen that strategy.
That's a very good question, a very important question, right? Because I mean, any cybersecurity solution vendor is no different than the customers that they're selling their product to.
Exactly.
They're still exposed, they still connected to the internet. I think you have to there's a number of disciplines you have to follow. Certainly there's CISA, the Information Security and Infrastructure Security Agency.
Cybersecurity.
Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency.
Yeah.
Trying to remember their
All our
acronym.
acronyms.
Yeah. So they've come out with a maturity model for cybersecurity. There's disciplines involved in that. There are standards that you should meet. There are libraries of exploits that have already happened, and so you can test against those things.
Right.
You can have third-party assessments, which is a method that we used. We had an independent third-party ethical hacker try to break into our technology while we were, during our development version, not the production version, but just to make sure we were building something that was going to be robust. So I think it's not just doing that once, but doing it, at least annually is another thing, because the threat is always changing and they're getting more sophisticated. The other piece that you have to do is you have to isolate some of your more vulnerable code or more vulnerable tools in such a way that they're not normally used or accessible on a day-to-day basis. So there's lots of different mechanisms to do that, but you don't want to leave them connected, so they're vulnerable all the time to anybody from anywhere.
Right. Yeah. It's not easy. It's
not easy. And you always just like the zero trust model, you have to assume breach. And so you have to treat it as if somebody has gotten inside. The other thing you have to do, and CISA has also brought out this in a recent policy or position paper called Security by Design, is you have to think like a hacker. When you're designing your software, your tools or whatever, every step of the way you ask, now, how could somebody get in here and abuse this or, undo what I'm trying to do? And so in our case, we took that approach. We have a very good Chief Information Security Officer, Dr. Bill Lawrence, who has decades of experience. And we just gave him carte blanche to say, poke holes at anything that our product engineering team is wanting to do. And from his vast experience, we just probed and we came up with lots of layers of disruption. We added more and more layers of disruption. If somebody were to reverse engineer our product or somehow get a hold of a secret when they weren't supposed to, how would our system respond to that? So we figured out multiple layers. Not that there's no such thing as perfect security.
Right.
And you should be highly skeptic of anyone who says there is. But you want to make it so hard that the threat actor gives up and goes away.
Right. Yeah.
It's like that old saying about the bear. You don't have to outrun the bear. You just have to outrun the person next to you.
Exactly. Well, and we also have to remember, if we take another step back, why are they doing this? There are a certain number of them that are doing this just for fun, but in a lot of cases, there is usually a financial motive of some sort. Either it's just a straight up, why do bank robbers rob banks? That's where the money's kept.
Yes.
Why do they commit ransomware and phishing? And because it's profitable to do so. As you said, you have to change the equation so they go after the non-Hopr customers, basically.
Well, and I think you also have to increase the risk for them. So the longer they are playing around trying to figure out, say, an AMTD system and to find a way to bypass it or exploit it, or the more that they're doing in that regard, the more risk they have of being discovered. And we have a feature in our runtime marker sharding such that if they try to access an endpoint, there's 100% likelihood that they are going to be detected. In other words, it's deterministic. They're going to be recognized. Like you made the example of the countersign, right? Is
Right.
if it's the wrong countersign, then
You're
you
dead.
start shooting. And
Yeah.
that's what we have in our system. If they try to get in and they don't have the right credentials, which they won't have because they can't get them, we immediately know that there's a threat knocking at the door, and we have other actions that are taken at that point. So it raises that risk to them if they're discovered tremendously.
And it makes it harder. And again, the one thing I tell people is that the hackers are very good at what they do, but they must remain completely undetected for the
Yes.
duration. If it's almost like a spy or something getting into a shootout with security forces. Yeah, you might escape, but the fact that the defender is now aware of the fact that you're in there, you're done.
Yeah.
The defenders are now going to be actively seeking to oppose you, and unless you have already seized enough control of their infrastructure to like wrest it away from them, you're going to be stopped,
Yes.
and you're not going to get any money out of them.
Yes.
So that's pretty slick. Would you be able to show us a demonstration of your product that we could just visualize it like you did before?
Yeah. Let me.
Yeah, let's go through the other slides.
Do I need to? So real quickly to introduce.
Go through whatever you need to do. Like
Yeah. To introduce the video. So everything I talked about 3 dimensions, I'm just going to explain how it's done. So we have a networking proxy, and we've added to it this additional code that actually hops the secret and the identity credential at a high frequency. That whole package is what we call a workload security proxy, or a WASP for short. And as I said, it's cloud native. It gets deployed into a Kubernetes environment. So there's an app or a device or an AI microservice or something that is connected to it, and all of the communications in and out of that app is routed through the proxy.
Right. And just to take a step back, this would work in an on-premises environment.
Oh yeah, it work as long as it would work in on-premises environment. It'll work on VM machines. I say Kubernetes here, but it can work in a VM machine as well, which handles containerized applications.
No, and that's so you're compatible with, you're a hybrid. You're compatible, whatever you have, you can use Hopr basically.
Yes, pretty much. So the AMTD gets created when these 2 workloads start talking. So before I mentioned, say, a web app and a database, they have to talk through these WASPs, and we're actually using the secret that we hop as an encryption key, and it's generated on demand at the 2 workloads, and there's no key exchange going on. They can, because we have a unique algorithm, they both generate an identical encryption key when they start a communication process. We call that synchronous ephemeral encryption. So the key can never be intercepted because it's not passed. It stays right in the container where the WASP is. And that connection is a bidirectional encryption as well. So sidecar is a term that software engineers and DevOps engineers use to sort of explain this concept. So you can think about this app as being the motorcycle and the sidecar that attaches next to it, and it's bound to it when it gets deployed into an environment. Gotcha. But every time these 2 machines start a new connection, there's a identity verification of their identity credential, and there's a new encryption key that's generated. And this is the AMTD that's built around that pair, and it's what creates this micro shard of the attack surface.
It's pretty slick. So what encryption are you using?
So right now we use AES 256, which is a symmetric encryption algorithm, and everything we use is symmetric only. So we're not using any what's called asymmetric cryptography, which is the type of cryptography that is vulnerable to quantum computing attacks.
I was actually going to ask you about quantum computing on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So NIST is working on quantum computing post-quantum algorithms and resistant algorithms that would be possible to replace the existing asymmetric cryptography because it's weak against against quantum computing.
Right.
We're post-quantum because we're using symmetric encryption. And symmetric encryption, it does not have the same vulnerability to quantum computing. So that's a very good thing for us. Everything is purely symmetric.
Pretty slick. Yeah. We can get into that about how that would work or not, but just to keep our audience, that is pretty slick that you future-proofed against it. You don't know when quantum computing, or frankly, is going to have a practical in-world application, but if that time comes, the traditional old way of if your reliance was on, I'm going to give a really hard math problem to a computer that it won't be able to solve, and then quantum computers come along, you're in trouble, basically.
Right. Do you know, if I play this video, does audio come through automatically, or is there some setting I need to do?
So hit stop sharing. You have to hit
go back to share
your screen, and there's on the right side there's going to be a little checkbox that says
I see it. Got it.
Make sure that's checked and you're good. I am learning. I can be trained.
Yeah, good. All right, let me play this video.
All right.
This video demonstrates how Hopr's workload security proxy, nicknamed WASP, connects host workloads operating in any environment and secures their data communications using quantum-proof, end-to-end encryption without exchanging the key. The video also demonstrates how host workloads are protected from untrusted workload connections. Here we have a communication between two cloud endpoints. At the top, we have the Babar endpoint, and it's communicating across the internet with the Cornelius endpoint shown at the bottom. And you can see that Babar is getting a response from its messages to Cornelius. Every 30 seconds, the Babar endpoint is starting a new session with Cornelius via a Hopr WASP, and Cornelius is using its WASP to separately start a session with Babar. And all of this communication is happening over the internet with bidirectional end-to-end encryption through the two WASPs using Hopr's synchronous ephemeral encryption protocol. And you can see the actual curl command from Babar to Cornelius, and vice versa, is not encrypted. You can see here that our endpoint is connecting to an unencrypted HTTP web server. There is no TLS, nor any other external service involved in encrypting the messages. Quantum-proof symmetric keys are generated in the WASP and remain there to encrypt or decrypt messages between the two workloads. The data they exchange is protected over the entire route between them. But if a third endpoint appears and tries to connect to Babar, you can see that a response is not returned. The third endpoint's message to Babar is initiated and travels over the internet into the WASP at Babar, but it fails decryption and is black-holed by the WASP. The message is not seen by Babar, and no response is returned to the sender. This is very useful for application endpoints on the internet, because any type of response, even rejection, can positively identify the existence of an application. So the WASP drops all untrusted and potentially malicious ingress messages, including any that may contain TLS encrypted malware. But if this third endpoint was a trusted endpoint, all the third endpoint would need to do is activate its Hopr WASP, configured with the correct CHIPS algorithm. Although the third endpoint cannot access the Babar endpoint directly, when its message to Babar is sent through its WASP, you can see that we have accessed the WASP listener port on localhost, and the message is decrypted by the WASP at the Babar endpoint. The symmetric encryption occurred on demand without a key exchange or handshake, and it's continuous between the third endpoint and the Babar endpoint. Every single communication session that is initiated by a WASP will generate a new key based upon a specific CHIPS algorithm and unpredictable dynamic internet information. This produces unique keys for sessions between a single pair of networked application workloads, but also for sessions with any other networked workloads or networked apps that are micro-segmented by using segment-specific CHIPS algorithms. Hopr WASPs enable high-trust, ultra-secure, quantum-proof application networking across all environments. You can learn more. This video demonstrates how
Sorry.
Hopr's workload security proxy.
There you go.
It's pretty slick.
So, yeah, the demo there kind of illustrated as well that, if they come knocking on the door to one of these protected, trusted workloads, they're immediately detected. And we actually log that, and we can pass it on to a security event incident manager. But it's much, much different than a detection response tool, which is only taking a guess at whether there was a true threat or not. This is deterministic. That's why I said at 100% likelihood they're going to be discovered. And then the part in the video that talks about microsegmentation, that's another zero trust principle, that you want to break your network up into small pieces, so that if an insider, someone does get past your perimeter defenses and they're in your networks, you don't want them to be able to move laterally around anywhere they want to in the network, which is what a lot of them do to inflict ransomware and that type of thing. Is they'll get inside a network and get to places they shouldn't get. And so most of the segmentation that goes on today in cybersecurity is done at the network layer. I don't know if there's anyone who actually does it at the application layer the way that we do, but it's a much more granular form of microsegmentation that we do, because you can microsegment as small as 2 workloads just by changing the algorithms. And when you heard about the CHIPS algorithm in the video, CHIPS stands for codes hidden in plain sight, and that was the original
headlines on CNN that was publicly available information, but no way of knowing which piece of publicly available.
That was the original, right, exactly. The original concept is take dynamic information that everybody can see and use it. It's hidden in plain sight. We're using it in a novel way.
Well, it's like saying like a spy would all right, buy today's copy of the New York Times, the 5th word on the second page, which is verifiable, but there's nothing special about the underlying credential that would identify that as, oh, this is the code.
Yeah.
And even if you did, I guess, get lucky and figure it out, it's going to change anyway.
Right.
So
That's
even
why
if you did somehow manage to get in, you're going to lose that access as soon as it shuffles.
Yes.
The other thing I really liked was how it dropped the connection as opposed to denying the connection, because that's like, if I can just put this in a way that would be like someone trying to figure out where your hidden clubhouse is by just knocking on all the doors on a street. If you said, hey, what's the password at one of your doors? Well, now you've just given away that, oh, something is here that requires a password, as opposed to your system where that knock is ignored.
Yeah.
Because we already know no one knocks. Why would we make a note? That's not the correct thing. And so they just keep moving on, having no idea that they've, walked right past the actual target. That's pretty slick. I guess just to bring it back to the larger cybersecurity thing, we've been talking a lot about, these certificates and zero trust. I guess, what is a major gotcha that's out there? If you were a CISO or someone that is out there that's very security conscious, that maybe today is comfortable thinking that they're in a good position, what can you tell them to scare that person about a gotcha that they maybe hadn't considered yet?
So I think every security professional should carefully look under the hood of their architectures and their systems, particularly at the identity credentials that they use for those machines. We have used, so there's something called PKI, public key infrastructure, that's been around for decades. And we talk about identity certificates and signing requests and signing, software, signed software and that type of thing. All of that is done with a PKI certificate, but it's not the kind of certificate that you normally think of, right? It's not a piece of paper with a stamp on it. It's not the certificate we got from HoCo, the Cyber thing for completing the Cyber Accelerator. It's actually a pair of keys, so two cryptographic keys, a public key and a private key. And the private key is really the sensitive one that needs to be kept secure and secret. And so you usually stick that in a vault. But that's what makes up a certificate, an identity certificate. So the identity, the entity that you've given that certificate to, they have a public key that you can view. And this is how your secure browsers work, right? When you get the lock on your browser and it's going back to a website or whatever, they're able to know that is legitimate endpoint that you're connecting to because it matches, the key matches what the browser expects it to match, and so it's secure. You're not being spoofed.
Right.
The problem is that these identity certificates are static and they seldom change, and they can be stolen. If the private key is stolen or obtained somehow by a phishing attack or whatever means, and insiders, as we've said, are very, very clever, then they can do anything they want. And that was kind of partly what was behind the SolarWinds thing, is they were able to sign a piece of software that SolarWinds never vetted through their production chain and send it out, as if it was legitimate patch. So there are known vulnerabilities there because it's a static credential. And what many vendors have done is they've decided, okay, we're just going to change the PKI credentials more often, the keys more often. And you see this even with browsers. They started off being a PKI certificate was good for 3 years, and then it went down to, I think it was longer than 3 years. And then after a while, it went down to 3 years. And the last I heard, Google was asking it for it to be like 3 months or something. I mean, it's gotten shorter and shorter. And it's because threats are knowing how to obtain those keys and spoof or misrepresent legitimate websites and attract, victims and get passwords and other things that they can use to attack. So there's as you know from the business that you do, the adversary has so much more opportunity, and we're at a disadvantage. So
yeah.
Certificates, identity certificates that we have today, they've done a great job for the last 30 years. They're also needed. PKI is also needed to do the exchange of the handshake and the exchange of the transport layer security key, which is the session key. When you use an encrypted session on the web, you're sending data to your bank through the browser. There is a session key associated to encrypt that data and make it secure while it's traveling. That's based upon the PKI certificates, and so, or the PKI keys, and that's a key in and of itself. But that key has to be exchanged. So if I sent you an encrypted message, I encrypt it with my key, I send it to you. The only way you can decrypt it is if you have my key. And so this handshake that goes on at the start of a transport layer security session is to get you that key. Right. And so there's a number of back and forth transmissions between the machine, your browser and the other web machine, to get the key at the destination so you can decrypt and it can read the message and stuff. So even if you change these PKI certificates at a more frequent rate, you're creating an entirely new identity for that machine. Now, that machine may have been running for 10 years, but you've now given an entirely new identity. Any history it had, any record of trust that it had, is disappeared. It's vanished. It looks like any other new machine that just appeared on the network because it has an entirely new identity credential. It'd be like, use the example of the driver's license in MBA again. It'd be like you going down to the MBA every 3 months or every 6 months and getting an entirely new identity credential with a new photo and new address and everything on it. It's still you, but you're using it as your credential, but it's an entirely new credential, and there's no sense of trust with it. So the method we've come up with is to make that identity credential dynamic, verifiable, and every time it gets presented, it's verified. And the chain of trust is in the workload itself, which you don't have with today's PKI certificates. The chain of trust ends with the authority that gave that machine the certificate.
Right.
So there's a whole process of certificate authority trust domains and chains of trust. So if you go to Hopr.co, for example, our root certificate for our identity for our website has been vetted by a third party, and so they know who we are, that we have control of the site. But if I go down several layers inside our organizations to subdomains and that sort of thing, each of those authorities that can issue a certificate for something in that part of the network gets its authority from the root domain, and that's the chain of trust. The problem is when I get down to giving it actually to a machine that's going to do something like a workload, that only takes the certificate signing request for me for this automated systems to give that certificate out. And at that point in time, there's no trust because that recipient of that certificate was never vetted. I just assumed if the assumption there is that the machines inside your network are trustworthy. The workloads inside your network are trustworthy. But if there's an insider, if we're supposed to have zero trust,
or an attacker, that's part of the workload.
Right. And so they have, there are known mechanisms of attack, container breakouts, and all of these other things where these vulnerabilities exist. So my advice is, we've implicitly assumed trust in the identity certificate system that we have.
Right.
Machines, and it's static and there's no verification going on. And I think that's going to be the big gotcha. That when that hammer falls, it's going to be a sad day. And here's the other problem. NIST is working hard on quantum proof, quantum resistant algorithms to give PKI an extended life in the quantum age, right? But there is no effort going on, even with those new algorithms, there's no effort going on to meet the zero trust standard. So the zero trust standard has to be met with the quantum resistance standard. And so they're not dealing with my pet peeve is they've only fixed half the problem. And they're giving us a false sense of hope that this quantum thing has been fixed when there's this other zero trust thing out there with those identity certificates. And we're talking about billions and billions of devices. So
you don't need a quantum computer to break this if you do it again in a different way with this corrupting it. And I guess that takes us to, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time here, but just what's a larger concern? Like we're in the cybersecurity industry. What concerns do you have about our industry with the challenges that we face?
Yeah, I think sometimes we don't do enough to protect our own systems. We don't do enough to ensure that what we're delivering to our customers is in fact secure software itself. And I think CISA, again, they have this principle I mentioned, secure by design. There's also one called secure by default. I think every cybersecurity software vendor, whether they're defensive or whatever they might be monitoring, a lot of them are platforms that have monitoring systems. They have even if they're all using PKI certificates for identity. So they have a vulnerability. They're not doing enough to clean their own house or take care of their own house before they sell a product to a customer. Right. And I think it's a disadvantage for the customer, and it's kind of because they're interested in making money and selling their products and getting product out the door. And every product is going to have vulnerability to 0 days, to things that they didn't know about. That's the nature of the game. But there's a lot of things they do know about or could do more of to protect their own products. And as I've seen and talked to CEOs of other cybersecurity companies, and for example, they're using self-signed PKI certificates with no termination date on it, and selling products to customers. It just, to me, that's horrendous.
Because to your point, every single time you introduce another instance of this, you're adding another. It's one more. Your attack surface just grew a little bit, and you
Yeah.
don't even realize it.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, that is of concern. And I guess just so one of the last questions I'll ask, and this is sort of a big one. What concerns do you have about this modern world of AI that we're entering? Call it whatever you want, large language models. How do you see that? What keeps you awake at night about that, especially in relation to the cybersecurity industry?
So I think agentic AI is the thing that worries me a lot. AI has been
A large language.
wonderful.
That's an AI that's been given a task to
Yes. So it's essentially an AI that you have given, the company has given agency to take actions on its behalf, on a human's behalf.
It's an intern, basically.
Yeah. Well, yes. So the generative AI that we've all experienced and used heavily, that has come about to for creatives, for writing, for all of those things that we need to generate information, performing research. I'm overjoyed with that. That has really been an efficiency gain, and I think it's really helpful. But when you get to the point of, by the way, I think you have to look at that AI too and assume about 50% of it is wrong that you get. And so you have to know your material, and you have to ask your queries in the right way to be able to see where errors are being made and the responses you get back. But when you move from that just simple task of creating a natural language processed answer to a query or a research to actually an operational situation where an AI is going to act and make decisions in place of a human with or without supervision, the level of trust and confidence you have to have in that is leaps and bounds above
where it should be.
Yeah, and the risk if it's wrong. And so there are all of these, you talked about the attack surface and how large you get. We're adding a whole lot to the attack surface with agentic AI.
Right.
We have AI systems are microservices that are distributed. So there's plenty of seams and access points to get into that. There's entirely new techniques. I think OWASP has a separate top 10 list for LLMs. The MITRE attack model has a separate whole model. I think forget what it's called, but there's a separate whole model for AI systems. The level of protection that those need, the level of trust the protection they need to have, the trust that you need to give them agency is so far above where we are. And so I think the market's moving too fast to agentic. We're not securing, many vendors I talk to are not securing their systems like they should.
Well, and that's the reason why I referred to them as like having an intern, because that's the way that I think of these things is like, would you, there are things that maybe an intern, an unpaid, untrained, new, naive person that's very open to being tricked by a malicious outsider. Are you putting them in charge of, what are you putting them in charge of? Like critical bleeding edge research where they might just straight up get it wrong? That's insanity. But suddenly we call it an AI agent and our brain falls out of our head and we think, well, this is smarter than a human. And I've heard stories about how they just straight up fail most times.
Yeah. And then you extend that, Colin, to AI on AI. Let's just say, a threat AI attack, offensive AI against another AI system, which is not even an AI cybersecurity system. It's just an AI system running something at a hospital. That's a nightmare.
You don't have to be too creative to come up with a terrible thing. What could possibly go wrong in that system?
There's nightmare scenarios. Or the
Well, and not
financial
only that, and the
system.
fact that we don't truly understand why some of these systems, they're non-deterministic. They're, which is weird for a computer, that
Yeah,
you give it a task and it doesn't do the same thing every single time. I
yeah,
agree with you on that, where I worry that in the interest of catching some market, a lot of products, and I've talked to a lot of people that are pitching things like agents that would answer emails on your behalf, which to
yeah,
me is the height of insanity. And with apologies to people that are selling those products, because again, you are one hallucination away from being in the news, where your AI agent decides that the best way to break the ice is with a nice racist joke or something like that. And now, whoops, why did it do that? Well, we don't know. We
yeah.
have no idea why that happened.
Everything is built on trust.
Right. And you can never trust these things because who's to say that it won't? It's because I always say this, that 100% is a really high number and forever is a really long time. They
Yeah,
only have to make one mistake and they can just destroy everything.
yeah.
So
And
Tom,
with the way our cybersecurity systems and market is, with still many people rely on perimeter defenses and
yep.
think that conventional approach is good enough, and it's not. It's proving failures every day, every week.
It's almost like saying I have penicillin, so I'm fine. That no, there will never be any resistance to this, medicine, that it's a moving target. And I say it's an unfair game because the customers, and this is a problem for my smaller clients, like nonprofits, people that are funded by grants, you have to keep investing in cybersecurity. There's no like, we've done it.
Yeah,
We're finished.
yeah,
It's secure because of the very nature. And that's just unfair because then you have to tell them, well, no, the thing that you built is going to be potentially, not working in 6 months from now. That's a
yeah,
tough pill to swallow.
yeah.
But, Tom, thank you so much for being generous with your time. And if people want to learn more about your company or if they're interested in speaking with you and learning if your product is appropriate for them, where can they go to find all that?
So our website is hopr.co.
Hey, look at that.
And so that's my email address too. You can reach out to me if you have a question. I'll see if I can help you. But thank you, Colin. Thank you for inviting me to speak.
I'm glad that, yeah, thank you for, and I'm looking forward also for the, doing something similar to this. I hope you enjoyed the, hearing what Tom had to say. And we're going to try to do this with the other members of the cohorts, get them to share their story. But yeah, thank you, Tom. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in on this. And Tom, you can stay on for just a minute afterwards. But, thanks again for tuning into the HoCo Cyber Collective Podcast. This is Colin Hamill signing off, and we will talk to you on the next episode. And hit stop.
Thank you for listening to the HoCo Cyber Collective Podcast. Stay connected, stay curious, and join us again for our next episode.
Brought to you by the HoCo Cyber Collective.